previous lesson, we have seen that testing is an important process in the development of software and program. In this lesson, we're going to look at two important techniques known as the validation technique and the verification technique. When designing program, it's important to have an idea what is validation and what is verification. Let's jump to the learning objectives now. You need to be able to explain the difference between validation and verification. List some validation techniques that can be used. Validation and verification are two ways to check that the data entered into a computer is correct. Data entered incorrectly is of little use. So validation and verification are two important techniques to make sure that the data we are entering in the system are the correct one. We know that data that are entered incorrectly is of little use. It may make the system go wrong or maybe crash our program. So it is important to validate and also verify. Data verification. Verification is performed to ensure that the data entered exactly matches the original source. Maybe you have come across verification when you're creating a new account on Facebook or Gmail. It asks you to do a double entry of your password that you have chosen. As such, verification is to make sure that the data you have entered first time matches the second time that you have entered. Verification is also used during data transmission process. Verification means checking the input data with the original data to make sure that there have been no transcription or copying errors. The standard way to do this is to input the data twice to the computer system. As such, check the data values which should be the same. And it's very important that we understand that verification is very important, especially when data transmission is happening. Now, at the time of entry, especially when it comes to a user interface, a graphical user interface, we can use the double entry technique to verify, or we can use the screen or visual check method for verification. For data transmission, we can use parity check, checksum or ARQ or echo check to verify there are no transcription or copying errors. Now, data validation. Sometimes we want to make sure that the data that we are entering is sensible and reasonable. For example, if I'm asking for an input of age, you can't ask the user to input alphabets or punctuation mark and so on. While it may happen that the user input incorrect characters or invalid numbers. So validation is an automatic computer check to make sure that the data entered is sensible and reasonable. It doesn't check the accuracy of data. Here, accuracy is related to verification, where we check whether there are no transcription errors. The original data source and the one copied must be same. Now, there are different validation check methods that you can use, or validation check rule. A validation check is a rule that is built into a database to check that the data entered is valid, is sensible, is reasonable, is within acceptable boundaries, and complete. The word sensible means that those data being entered are make sense in fact. Now, these are the different validation techniques that you can use, and this has been taken from Inkaleb Patel notes from his Google site. So the first type of validation that you can usually use is a range check. When I say range check here, is basically I'm looking at a number line where I have a lower limit and an upper limit. So only values within that range can be taken. For example, mark of a student on subject of 100 can be from 0 to 100. Now the acceptable mark for that can be only between 0 and 100. Therefore, if we have a program that is computing average of marks for a student, we know that we'll need a range check. As such, range check checks that a value falls within the specified range. For example, number of hours worked for a particular user can be less than 50 or more than 0. Now, length check is different from range check. Here we want to check that the data is not too long or too short. Maybe we want to say that a password is of 6 characters length. As such, 6 character length. If a password is more than 6 characters length, it is not accepted. If it is less than 6 again, it is not accepted. If it is more than 6 also, it's not accepted. Now, limit check is same as range check. That involve rules basically on one limit, maybe greater or equal to 0. If it is above that range, maybe reject negative numbers like you can see from the table, greater or equal to 0. Next you have type check. Check that the data entered is of a given data type. For example, here we have an example has been provided. Number of brothers or sisters would be an integer, whole number. So we can't accept decimal numbers. For example, an age cannot be decimal. So we can do the type check. You're going to learn about data type later on related to variables, which can be integer, real, string, and so on. Next is character check. Checks that a string of characters is entered. It doesn't contain any invalid characters or symbol. For example, a name cannot include percentage or telephone number include dot or plus. But most of the time we have telephone numbers that contain plus, but telephone numbers cannot contain maybe alphabets depending on the country you're residing. We have a certain format check. Maybe you know that we can have 25, 12, and then we have 90. If you take a look, that's a date. Now this date followed a format with 2 digits for day and 2 digits for month and 2 digits for year. As such, it has a certain pattern. So we can do a format check when a user is inputting a date or whatever. Now here a national insurance number can be in this form where you have L starting with it and ending. Okay, so we have a certain format check. Maybe password must start with a capital letter, and with a lowercase in the end. So this is a format check. We need to follow a certain pattern. For example, here it has been provided 2 letters followed by 6 digits followed by a single letter for a given password maybe. Now presence check, when you have a user interface and you want to make sure that the fields, the different input boxes being entered by the user is not blank, you can check or perform a presence check as such to make sure that no blank data is provided by the user. One particular example can be your Facebook user account login system, where you will log in through Facebook via your username and password. So it's important to have a username and then a password. You can't keep it blank and then click on login. It will give you errors. Now check digit is also a validation technique used for barcode as such. The last one in a code are used to check the other digits are correct. We have also barcode readers in supermarket, but most of the time in programming you will use range check, length check, type check, format check, and presence check, especially for your pre-release material. Now, this is a quick exercise on validation and verification from June 2017, question number 4. You're provided with statements and asked you to tick whether it is validation or verification. You can pause the screen to take a look to this statement, and then we're going to look at the answers. So the first one, to automatically check for the accuracy of a barcode. In this case, that's obviously validation, because we have seen that we are going to use check digit for that. To check if the data input is sensible, not accuracy here, so validation. Data input matches the data that has been supplied, that's double entry, so verification. To automatically check that all required data fields have completed, that's validation. So these are the answers for the exercise. Again, from Inkla Patel workbook, a hospital holds records of patients in a database. For the fields are data visit, follows a particular pattern, day, month, year, an 8-digit patient ID, patient height, and contact telephone number. Present check is one possible validation. For each other field, give another validation check that can be performed. For example, data visit, we can do a format check. In this case, you can give a different pattern of data, maybe DD, month, and year. Patient height, okay, which is in meter. In this case, you can give an alphabet, and the validation check can be, let's say, data type check. You provide then a string. Next is patient ID, which is 8-digit. In this case, you can do a length check and give a patient ID more than 8-digit. A contact telephone number. So contact telephone number, again, you can do a certain character check to make sure that doesn't contain any telephone number. For example, a question mark or whatever. So these are the different data that you can provide. For data offices, you can do a format, type, or character check, giving some example of data that it should fail. Patient height for range check and limit check. Patient ID, type check, length check, and range check. Contact telephone number can be length check, type check, character check, or format check. Thanks for watching. Like and